Perek Chafbet.
Beside the suitcase.
We begin now, and it is a continuation of chapter 21. In the end of chapter 21, we had the incident at the site of Arnon or Ravna or Arvona, lots of different names, the Yivu site. The Malach of God is up there, and it's a big plague, and David offers sacrifices. He buys the plot, similar language to when Avram bought Marat HaMachpelah is used in this telling of the story. And with that, there is a recognition of David as the story really continues here in chapter 22. Vayomer David, Zehu Beit Adonai HaElohim, V'zeh Mizbeach Le'olah L'Yisrael. And David said, here will be the house of God, and here the altar of the burnt offerings of Israel. And if you can see there at the end of that verse, we have the pei saying that this is the end of a parsha, an end of a portion. We see one of the differences here between the chapters as were divided by the church fathers or whomever exactly it was, and the way it was divided in the Masorah of our tradition, where David saying this statement is relevant, is really the end of the story of chapter 21, because David recognizes that this is the Beit HaElohim. To paraphrase from Yaakov, it's Beit Elohim v'zeh shara shamayim. It's the house of God. This is the gate to the heaven. This is the place for sacrifices, because God has God's wrath, as it were, has been stopped. There's no more destruction going on. The plague has been done. So this is the place where the house of God should be. This is where sacrifices should be. Vayomer David lichnos et hagerim asher be'eretz Yisrael. And David gave orders to assemble all of the foreigners living in the land of Israel and assign them to be hewers, to quarry and dress stones for the building the house of God. And here we see something, as we've learned through this book, one of the things I've tried to emphasize is the discrepancies between this book and Sefer Shmuel. Different, right? Really playing up David, making him look better, temple idea, different order, and little pieces here. The names are different, different sometimes numbers, that really a different focus and different purpose of the book. And of course, the biggest omission from the book is the chait with Bathsheba and Uriah, where he sleeps with a married woman, impregnates her, and then has her husband killed. But there's something in this book that is not in the book of Shmuel, which is all of this material. In Shmuel, right, God says to David through Nathan, through Natan HaNavi, you're not allowed to build the temple, and David doesn't build the temple, and that's it. But in this book, David does everything but build, right? He gives the orders. He gets all the people together to get the stones. And in verse 3, Uvarzel la rov la mismerim lidlatot hashe'arim v'lamachbarot hechin David unechoshet la rov ein mishkal. And iron for nails, for the doors, and for the clasps. And David lay aside so much copper it could not be weighted. V'atzei arazim le'ein mispar. And cedar logs that couldn't be numbered, because the Sidonians and the Tyrians, they brought many, many cedar logs to David. Vayomer David, Shlomo b'ni Na'ar Varach, v'habayit livnot la'Adonai la'agdil l'mala l'shem l'teferet l'chol ha'aratzot achina nalo, v'yachen David la'rov l'fnei moto. And David thought, or David said, my son Shlomo is a young man. And the house that we need to build for God is going to make him famous. It's going to make him gadol, great. It's going to give him glory throughout the world. And therefore, let me get the material for him. And David gets as much material as he can before he dies. And here we see a couple of things as well. So we never have a pronouncement in the book of Shmuel that Shlomo is going to be the next king. David doesn't say that. When Bathsheba comes to him and this God or Natan in the opening chapter of the book of Melachim and say, your son Adonio has proclaimed himself king, and you said Shlomo would be king. We don't even know if he's truly said that, if I remember correctly, the book of Shmuel. But here he is very expressive. He says, right, who's going to build the temple is going to be my son Shlomo, and he's just a child, and he's preparing everything to make that possible. So we see here a great discrepancy in this, David preparing, getting things ready to make it easier for Shlomo, and Shlomo being the one who is going to build the house, which, of course, in this book means, and in the book there as well, really, that that Shlomo has been chosen to be the next king. And we're in verse 6. Pasuk Vav, Vayikra Shlomo v'no vayitzaveh livnot bayit la'Adonai Elohei Yisrael. And David calls his son Shlomo and commands him, right? Charges him, challenges him to build the house for the God of Israel. Vayomer David l'Shlomo b'ni, ani haya im livavi livnot bayit l'shem Adonai Elohai. And now David tells Shlomo, doesn't just tell him that he has to do it, but is explaining why Shlomo has to do it. I wanted to build a temple. I had it in my heart. This was my dream. This was what I wanted to do. And here we have a verse which we alluded to in earlier chapters. It's not in the book of Shmuel, but it's the most well-known description or reason why David was not allowed to build the temple. Vayihi alai dvar Adonai lemor, dam larov shafachta, umilchamot gdolot asita, lo tivne vayit l'shmi ki damim rabim shafachta arza lefanai. And God says to David, what did he explain to him is the reason why not? You have spilled much blood. You have fought great battles. You will not build the house in my name because you have shed much blood on the earth in front of me. Now, we don't see that David, certainly in this book, David is vindictive and vengeful, and David is fighting the wars of God. But here it's just saying, right, the temple, if you're not an animal, is a place about life. If you're tameh, you've come in contact with something that's dead, you can't come to the temple. The Beit HaMikdash, is about life. It's about stopping plagues. It's about God intervening and helping the Jewish people, a place to connect. It's about eternity. It's not about death. Again, if you're an animal, then it's different. But here, we're being told, right, that David has spilled much blood. David has caused much death, and thus, even if he was not wrong in doing so, he's just disqualified as being the person to build the temple. Hine ven nolad la hu yeh ish menucha v'anichoti lo mikol avav misaviv ki Shlomo yashmo v'shalom v'sheket etein al Yisrael biyamav. And this is continuation of David relaying to Shlomo what was told to him, that God says to David, continues, you'll have a son born to you, and he'll be a man at rest. He won't have to go to war, and I will give him rest and peace from all the enemies of around. His name will be Shlomo, and peace and quiet will happen to Israel in his time. Hu yivne bayit l'shmi v'hu yeli leben v'ani lo la'av v'achinoti kisei malchuto al Yisrael ad olam. He will build a house in my name. He will be a son for me, and I will be a father for him, and I will establish his throne of kingship over Israel forever. Okay, and that's what God says to David. Makes it sound like David knew to name the son from Bathsheba Shlomo, and et cetera, which again we don't have in the book of Shmuel. And this is, again, it's bolstering the Davidic family. It's bolstering, making it look better. The temple, God is the one who declares who is going to be the king. God accepts him as a son. Continuing, David now goes back to his challenge now that he's portrayed or quoted God. Atavni, Ihi Adonai imach, vitzlachta uvanita beit Adonai Elech kasher diber alecha. So now, my son, God should be with you, and you should succeed in building the house of God as he promised you would. Achitein lecha Adonai seichel uvina vitzavcha al Yisrael v'lishmor Torat Adonai Elech. Only let God give you sense and understanding, and put you in charge of Israel, and also observe the teachings of God. Az tatzliach im tishmor lasot et hachukim v'et hamishpatim asher tziva Adonai et Moshe al Yisrael chazak v'ematz al tira v'al techad. And then you will, right? If you listen to the words of God, you will be listening to the commandments, to all the different rules that God commanded Moshe. Right? That's what you should be doing. You should be strong. Chazak v'ematz, be courageous. Don't be scared. And these last words, chazak v'ematz al tira v'al techad, chazak v'ematz, first used in the Tanakh, in the Torah, and then later in the first chapter of the book of Yoshua, really with Yoshua. So to an extent, by using the words here, we can deduce that Yoshua, in a sense, started the conquest of Israel, and Shlomo is going to complete it with the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Right, the conquest. There might still have been aliens, people who the Jewish people did not fully conquer, even in the time of Shlomo. After the time of Shlomo, there are people who Bnei Israel didn't conquer. But in terms of what Yoshua starts hundreds of years earlier with being told, Chazak v'yamatz al tira v'al techat, the same thing is being told here to Shlomo by David. Continuing in verse 14, Pasuk Yudal, V'hinei ve'onyi hachinoti leveit Adonai zahav kikarim mea elef v'chesef elef alafim kikarim v'lachoshev v'labarzelin mishkal ki larov haya ve'etzim v'amanim hachinoti va'alehem tosif. And he said, yeah, I can't build the temple, but I've gathered tons of materials, 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver and so much copper and iron that it cannot be weighed, and wood and stone. And you, Shlomo, it might not be enough. You need to get even more. V'imcha larov, osei melacha chotzvim v'chorashei even, va'etz v'chol chacham b'chol melacha. And there are a ton of craftsmen, of workmen at your disposal, hewers, workers in stones and wood, every kind of craftsman in every material that you can think of. La zahav, la kesef, la choshev, la barzel, ein mispar kum v'asei v'hi Adonai imach. We have gold, silver, copper, and iron without limit, and then the workmen who can work with it, go and do it, and may God be with you. Right? David l'chol sarei Yisrael la'azor l'shlomo b'no. And now David tells all of the officers of Israel that they need to help Shlomo in this building project. Halo Adonai Elohechem imachem, ve'niach lachem misaviv, ki natan biadi et yoshvei haaretz v'nichbesa haaretz lifnei Adonai v'lifnei amo. And right, God is with you, and God will give you rest from every side. He delivered the inhabitants of the land into my hands, so that the land lies conquered before God and before his people. That is to say, I fought all the wars. I did the hard work. Now you will have the time of peace. And therefore, what do you need to do with that? You have a time of peace. You have a time of wealth. You have to do a great project. You have to do something that's going to be purposeful. Right? He doesn't say go deal with homelessness or go deal with soldiers who come back from the army and have PTSD. Good things to do if the government has a surplus. What does he tell him that Shlomo's job is? Shlomo's job is to use this peace, to use this wealth to build the house for God, the Beit HaElohim. The chapter concludes, Ata tnu levavchem v'nafshechem l'trosh l'Adonai Elohechem v'kumu v'nu et mikdash Adonai Elohim lavi et Aron brit Adonai uchlei Kodesh Elohim labayit hanibneh b'shem Adonai. So now place it in your hearts and in your minds, very sort of Deuteronomy, Devarim language, to doresh, to really means to inquire of God, and get up and build the temple and bring so that we can bring the ark and all of the mizbeach, all the holy vessels to the house which has the name of God. So we see a chapter, a very important chapter, a very different chapter in terms of understanding the history, right? And maybe David says this at the end of his life to Shlomo, gives him the command about building the temple. Maybe he's not doing it when Shlomo was 6 or 8 and telling him in 5 years or 10 years. This could be at the end of his life. It's still, even if it is at the end of his life, it's not reported to us in the book of Melachim. In the second chapter of the book of Melachim is David's last will and testament, or whatever we want to call it, where he commands his son Shlomo, tells him to listen to the mitzvot, to perform the mitzvot, and also tells him, if you want peace, these are the people that you need to get rid of. This chapter tells a very, very different story, and it's a story where Shlomo is seemingly predestined to be the one who's king, predestined to be the temple, and significantly in terms of the life of David, David is denied by God to build the temple, but he does everything but build the temple. He ensures that it will happen, not just in his waging wars and making it a time of peace in his successor and his son's reign, but also in gathering so much of the materials to give Shlomo a head start. And it's a lesson in life, really. We can't accomplish everything. There's certain things we will not be able to accomplish. Life, we don't live for an eternity. We live for a small amount of time, but we have to do everything that we can in order to allow those who will take our place, whatever that might be, to complete the tasks. It's kind of like a well-known Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that the governor of Pennsylvania and one of the Jews running for governor in Colorado like to quote, and I joke around that it's quoted too much, so they need to get a new quote beyond that. But here we see a very, very important lesson. David is not allowed to build the temple, but he'll do everything up to the actual building. In a similar way, Moshe was not allowed to bring the Jews into Israel, but he brings them as close as possible, both of them, so that their successors, Yoshua and Shlomo, will be able to complete the job that they have done so much for in their lifetimes.